welcome everyone to episode 54 of Today in the Scene. I'm Joe with Indie Arcade Wave, and this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I just want to say thank you before we start to everybody that's been checking out the channel, sharing, subscribing, things like that. It means a lot to us. And I kind of wanted to revisit some of our previous episodes and talk about advice for indie developers. We have a lot of people that are jumping on here that are checking out the channel that are either looking to build their own cabinet or start producing their own game. And I think we've gotten a lot of really good advice from indie developers over the past year that we've been doing this. And I just wanted to throw some of the recent ones that I got that really stood out to me. So I've got, I believe, 5 clips here from different developers, different projects, kind of touching on different things to expect when going into an indie project. Before we jump into it, though, I just want to say, if you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, it means a lot to us. If you'd like, share, and subscribe, whether you're on the podcast or you are on YouTube. And we have some new merch coming out. We got some pins coming, some stickers, car vinyls. We're working on shirts, things like that in the future. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, keep an eye on the Instagram page, and we will let you know there when it's coming out. So the first clip that I've got today that I wanted to show you guys is from episode 39. It's the interview with Matt Glanville. For anybody that's not familiar with him or is following the indie scene with indie arcades, you would know him probably best for Switch and Shoot. He has developed a whole bunch of other games. He is UK based, constantly working on new games, and he's got one that's in the works right now. There's a demo for it on Steam. I'll throw the link in the description so you guys can check it out if you want to play it. But he gives some great advice to new indie devs, kind of all about aiming small. You don't want to go too big with your initial plan because building a game by yourself actually takes quite a bit more time and energy than you think. So it's better to start small, aim small, have a little functional goal before you start building on it. Basically, don't bite off more than you can chew. So here's that clip. Enjoy.
Gotcha. So, along the line of developing, any tips you would have for new developers getting started?
Tips for new developers. I think this is something that I think a lot of people say, but it's worth repeating, which is that you should really aim small. And when you think you're aiming small, you should probably aim even smaller because you're not aiming small enough. It's really easy to get grand ideas in your head, or even what you don't think are grand ideas, but actually will take a really long time to implement and a really long time to iterate on and get to a state that you're happy with. That whole process of making games, it just takes such a long time, and there's so many hidden traps that you can fall into, of hitting bugs or implementing something that doesn't work out exactly as you expected it to, and then you have to redesign it as you go, and now it's there's a dozen other things hooked into it depending on it that also break when you change it, and there's just so much that can go wrong. And the experience of making a game and finishing it and releasing it is, as I said earlier, it's just a really valuable experience to have, which will make it easier to make your next game. So the sooner you can complete that loop of starting a project, getting it to finished and releasing it, or maybe not even releasing it, but getting it into a state that you are happy to call done. That should be your first goal, really, I think. And the smaller the game is, the quicker you can get to that point, and the better your next game will be, and the more informed you will be in all the decisions you make for your next game as well. So that's my top tip, I think, is just aim small, and then when you think you're aiming small, aim even smaller.
I think that's a really, really good advice. I mean, I think if I'm right, I believe it was Street Cleaner and Brooks that said something very similar. They were talking about how people start with such ambitious projects, and they need to just focus down on the core and get the core done. And if that's done, release it. But you can always add on later. Don't try and overwhelm yourself with a million things when you could just focus on 100.
Yeah. And also, actually, something else which really helped me to actually get to that point, like something that's a bit more practical, I guess, is this idea of like putting rocks in a jar. Have you heard this analogy for for projects?
Maybe I don't know if I know exactly where you're going.
Okay, this is some advice that I had a few years back working on a project, and it really helps me like day to day managing my tasks. So imagine that each task you do to finish your project is a rock, and you're putting the rocks into a jar, and the jar represents the time you've got to complete the project, right? So when that jar is full, you've run out of time. Um, if you spend your time putting in tiny rocks, so like little bitty tasks that aren't that important, you will fill up the jar, and then you won't have any more space to put in the big stuff. So you'll run out of time and you haven't done the important things. If you start with the big ones, then you've got space to fill in the gaps with the little stuff. Um, you need to make sure that you like hit those big, tick those big important boxes off first, and then like come back and do the smaller stuff when there's time. And by the way, there probably won't be time because stuff takes longer than you expect. Like you will you'll be surprised how much stuff you have to cut. So like make sure that the stuff you're cutting is the stuff that isn't that important, that you don't actually care that much about, and that isn't going to sell copies if that's your goal.
All right. I hope you guys liked what Matt Glanville said there. I think it is really big for indies to really focus in and make sure that you are hitting your mark. You don't want to have too much on your plate because you might not be able to get it done. And then if you can't get it done, it never gets out. So that's a problem. The second team that we talked to here is Creaky Lantern Games. We spoke about the release of Street Cleaner, the video game for the Nintendo Switch. And in episode 31, which was the first time we spoke with Brooks and Jesse, they gave great advice of just ship the product, finish the game, send it. People get so good at starting a game, but they never finish it. So we revisited them for that Nintendo Switch release in episode 47, where they spoke about getting the word out about the game, how important it is. And if you don't let anybody know it's there, nobody's going to find it. And Jesse put this really well, and Brooks followed it up perfectly. Like, I think it is great advice for any kind of creative, whether you're into drawing, painting, visual art, or music, or anything in the spectrum of arts, period, and creatives. This is great advice for you. So check that out. The last time we spoke was, I believe the episode went live the day your game also went live. So what was it like to finally launch the game? I know we had a pretty extensive conversation last time about the advice you'd give to indie devs, and that being get it done. Like, ship the product. Don't work on it over and over and over and try and go so far with it. Like, work on the bare bones, make something that functions that you like, and then get it sent. So what was it like to finally launch that game?
Yeah, launch day is always the most nerve-wracking thing. I think for me especially, because I'm the one that if something's broken, I have to fix it. Like that's not Jesse's domain. That's all me. So I'm a nervous wreck when it goes live.
And my job on launch day is to make sure as many people know about it, that it's out there, and to get it seen. Because I mean, we could deliver a diamond, but if nobody knows it's there, then what good does it do?
Yeah, I always say that's kind of like the biggest problem from up and coming artists in, I think, any field, music, video games, whatever, is you can make good stuff and people will like it. Whatever you make, people are going to like it. The hard part is finding the people that will like it and getting them to know that it just exists.
Now that's some pretty solid advice in such a short amount of time. They said some good stuff there that can really make you think as an artist. The next team we spoke with was Astro Crow Games. This was a really good interview. I thought they had a lot to say and a lot of advice to give from multiple spectrums. I mean, you had the art side from Karis and the development and coding side from Brian. And it was really cool to see these two people come together and create such a cool game. So they've been working on Highlight Heroes for a little while now, and it is coming to the arcades soon. It's going to take some time to get there, but they're working on it, and I really hope it comes out sooner rather than later so that I can get my hands on it. In episode 46, Brian and Karis talked about what you should expect when jumping into a game from the position of coding and development on Brian's side and art on Karis' side, and they have a lot to say here. So enjoy this clip and really take it for what it is, and don't miss anything. Enjoy.
Yes.
So I guess on the side of indie games and future indie developers, what kind of advice would you give to people that are interested in making a game from a development standpoint and from an art standpoint?
Okay. From a development standpoint, it's a lot more work than you think. I will say that.
Got to be honest right out of the gate.
It is a lot more work than you think. I always tell my students, like, it's less about the idea and more about the execution. Like, what is throwback Highlight Heroes? On paper, it's NBA Jam, but Highlight. And now it's about 4.5 years in development, right? So that's not just because we also work full-time jobs, but it's because to make something where I feel comfortable releasing it, saying like this is a well-polished game with no bugs, no game-breaking bugs, and no inconsistencies in the art, and everything looks nice and feels nice, and like it takes so much more than you think. Like I've had the controller, the actual like control scheme for the game has roughly been the same since the first like 3 months of development. I've rolled with that, and we just added extra polish on top. I've fixed little bugs. I've added more things that communicate things to the player. Like, how do they know whose turn it is? How do they know where the ball is going to land? How do they know if a point is about to be scored and the game's over? Things like that. How many credits you have left? So that's all the minutia that ends up taking up all of that time, where the initial like prototype, right, the vertical slice or whatever have you, that takes no time at all. And so many indie devs, they end up getting very frustrated and just leaving once they see they have the potential in a product or whatever game, and then they realize, oh no, to get all of this working, to get all of this captivating and feeling good and playing well and having a good balance, that takes way too much time. And I see a lot of people who just drop off at that point. So you have to have a good wherewithal. You also have to make sure you don't scope yourself too large. So many students, they say, I've got an idea for a game. I go, let me guess, is it an MMO where the choices you do greatly affect the outcome of the game? They're like, yes. I'm like, you will not do that. You will never finish that game. It will not be done. So you have to think small, and then, if it has some sort of success or there's some momentum behind it, then you can put more time and effort and maybe hire more people. But it's also you have to be kind of humble. And if you go in thinking your first game is going to make you $1 million, you might be very disappointed. Also, you might be a little delusional when you go to show people and you're like, look how awesome this game is. And you've ignored the fact that there's other games that exist. And then you're like, what about my game would stand out? Why would someone play my game as opposed to someone else's? And, you can still make that as like a hobbyist. But if you go into an actual marketplace, there has to be a reason that someone would choose your game other than the fact that they know you. Right, like if they would choose yours out of a lineup, not knowing who made it. So you have to have a lot of work ethic to get it to that point.
Time and patience.
Mm-hmm.
Art.
So it's a lot more work than you think.
I think we heard that from someone.
Yeah, no, it's seriously. Like I said, the first 3 weeks that we worked on this, we created a framework of the whole product, and I would stick by that. Anybody who wants to make their own, make a sentence, decide the art direction early, and don't deviate from that. Decide your color palette and don't deviate from that. And all those things are great, but they're just the starting point, because after that, it's the hours and hours of grueling, asset development and animation work. And, even if your idea is as silly as let's add hats, you're going to be signing yourself up for hours and hours of work, where your 1024 by 1024 character sheet has, 200 frames in it, and each of those 200 frames now needs a pirate hat. And that is just one of your many hats that you need to create, right? So you know, in addition to just that, so if you are making a game and you're working on the artwork, I would recommend, of course, using texture atlases and sprite sheets. But more than that, like, plan for future assets in your sprite sheets so that you don't have to change the dimensions of it retroactively. And this is something that I continue to do on purpose. Like, even if I make a small asset, I will make sure that the texture atlas is a little bit larger to anticipate future and sprites and other things that I can implement into that same sheet. Of course, keeping everything into the grid and keeping the grid consistent, because if not, you're going to have to redo all that work, and you're going to have somebody's going to be grumbling about it, right? Don't be afraid to just have fun. And the more fun that you have making your assets, I believe strongly, the more fun is carried through when someone is playing it. Make sure to, and I've already mentioned this, but make sure you practice all of your 12 principles of animation and just pack it in there as much as you can, if that's your jam in the game that you're making, right? Not all games have to be like that. Some of them can be very stoic and very static. There's a lot of beautiful games that are like that. Yeah, I mean, I love doing this, and if anybody else wants to do this too, just know what you're signing up for, because it seems like it's easier than programming, but someone who also programs, I know that it's just a different kind of hard, and that's not to be just kind of glazed over. You have to use an entirely different part of your visual spatial brain to accomplish much more complicated and diverse tasks, even though everything that Brian does is important. Everything that I do is important. And if either of us is not maintaining our side of things, the game isn't going to be as successful. You can't have cool looking art and okay gameplay. You have to have, one or the other. And preferably you got both. So it just makes everything better, right?
I'll say that you also have to communicate with each other, so that way they can work together, right? So not even all disciplines. So it's like not just the art. The art has to talk to the sound designer as well as the gameplay designer, and then it creates that effect on the player where it's subliminal and it just works and it just feels right. So when we added new artwork and sound effects to the player controller, all these people were giving me compliments on how well I've tweaked the gameplay. And I just say, thank you, awesome. They didn't know that it's been the exact same gameplay model. I'm like, yeah, I've been really working hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because everything just comes together and makes that like perfect storm of that illusion in your head of like, oh, this is that character. I am that character. I'm controlling him in this world.
Balance. I think the word of the day is balance.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
You need that. You can't have one without the other.
Now, the last clip is from episode 43, where we interviewed Tomas, the creator of Black Emperor. And the game got picked up by Bumblebear Games. This was a pretty early project for him, so it shows that if you are just getting into development, you can make something that people are very interested in, and it can become something great. He talks a lot about the creative process, which it's really cool that he came from film first and then moved into video games. So you can really see that he has a unique perspective. It's a little bit different than everybody else's perspective of just jumping straight into games or coming from an art perspective. It's a little bit different. So he basically talks about not being afraid to shelve a project if it's not going great and start a new project, because you can always revisit it and maybe it's different than your original thought on the project. I thought it was a great way to kind of put it. And he also had one line in there that really got me, which is, you can't be creative when you're not creating. So you need to like really get in there and trial by error. I mean, jump into the fire head first and see if you can do it. And maybe you have a better idea come from that time you were there. So here's some great advice from him in a little clip. Check it out. Let us know what you think. I guess as a new developer, I'm curious as to what advice you would give people that are interested in creating video games. What advice would you give them to just get them started? I mean, the hardest part of doing anything or creating anything is getting going. What would you say to them to kind of give them that push forward?
That's a tough one because I don't consider myself like a super expert on how, but I could give like the advice to an old me who's just starting, if that's fair enough.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Prototype a lot, playtest a lot, trash ideas a lot.
So build it and don't be afraid to throw it out.
Yeah, and don't be afraid like people don't like it either. I think when I was just starting off, I was like kind of afraid that people were not liking it because there's like a certain moment where you show a prototype and you're like, and somebody who's playtesting it is like, ah, this sucks. Or it doesn't say it to your face, but you know that's what they are thinking. And you're like, ugh, but I know like I'm not showing them the real version, you know? And I think that's a prompt of either work harder or like don't take it so seriously and just don't be afraid to trash it and go on to the next prototype. Like I have like somebody, but this was before like the video game my video game era, like in the filmmaking era, but who was saying like you can only be creative when making, and I think that holds true for video games at least. Though I think in my case, like I love prototyping, but I don't love doing final products. But yeah, I think that's a different story. But if you're just starting out, I think doing a lot of prototypes would work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing just try it. I mean, like you can always spend some time and make something, and if it doesn't turn out the way you want, you can start over. Like it's not the end of the world if you need to start over on a project, and not everybody makes their best project right away. You probably had plenty of prototypes.
Yeah, and you know what? Like trash it might be a little bit harsh. Not you put it that way. Like for example, with the story of how Black Emperor came to be. Like this was my first prototype, and probably I was not happy with it. Like I had this idea, and then it was my first try, and I said, "Wow, this video game making is so hard." And then I had like the possibility, like a couple of years later, like what do you want to do? And I decided like to take that prototype, take the dust off, and like polish it out, and now it's an arcade cabinet. So it's not maybe it's not about like trashing it, but maybe you can save it until you learn enough to know how to execute it. You know?
Yeah, put it on the shelf for later.
Right. I think that's it. And don't take criticism too seriously. It might not be because like the game sucks or anything. It might just be because your capacities are not there yet in order to execute the amazing idea that you have or something.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is maybe the game's not done. You know, I mean if you're in prototype and you're testing, clearly the game isn't done. So if they don't like it, you can take that feedback and use it as improvement. Don't take it as harsh criticism.
I agree. That's like a super positive vision. There's also like the other side of the blade, which is like I don't know. At the end, it's super personal, you know. But people who keep trying on some idea, like I know this, like you play it and you feel like it's not the prototype is not going anywhere, and you feel like you understood what they were going for, and it's still not gonna work out. And you see some people like trying and trying and trying, doesn't work and doesn't work and doesn't work. And sometimes you say like, oh, they should just give up, you know. And sometimes you have to like sometimes that happens to you too. So it's also like being honest. Okay, maybe this sucks. I'm just gonna go to the next idea. You know, it's like a double-edged sword. Like I guess that's where the first mode of expression was coming from. Don't be afraid of trashing the idea and go to the next one. Like don't become too obsessed with one thing. Maybe you can put it on pause and move to the other thing. You just like maintain yourself in creative movement and for those creative juices to keep on surfacing.
Yeah, just make sure you're moving. You can always
Right.
take that idea, put it on the shelf, work on something else, and maybe an inspiration from that next project gives you that missing piece you needed for the last project.
Exactly.
Maybe that moves you forward.
Or maybe you're creating a single player and you put it in the shelf, and 2 years later you take the dust off and you take it off the shelf, and it's not a single player. It's actually like I don't know, a horror game, like a horror multiplayer game.
It can always change. You never know.
Yeah.
All right, so we got some great advice from them there. This is from all of the creators. I think this is amazing just for anybody that wants to create a video game or anything in the future. And you can really take this advice to heart and get going with it. Best of luck on creation. Again, I want to say thank you for checking the episode out. I'll throw links to some of these episodes in the description so you can find those and watch the whole episode. If you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like, whether you're on the podcast or on YouTube. It means the world to us. It really helps. And like I said, we've got some merch coming, so check out the Instagram. Be ready for that. Pins, shirts, hopefully in the future, and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you want to support us on Patreon, it means the world. It helps us a ton, just for paying for things here and there, and it allows us to get more merch in the future. So until next time, peace.